They took my $40,000 inheritance and handed it to my sister, but in the end, I came out on top. Clearing out my childhood bedroom was supposed to be straightforward. I was back in Cedarville for the weekend, helping my parents prepare to move into a smaller place. Honestly, though, I hadn't been given much of a choice. My mom, Patricia, referred to it as preserving memories, using that sugary, sweet tone she often adopted to mask her true intentions. What she actually meant was that I'd be doing all the labor while she supervised. "Rebecca, don't forget the back of the closet," she shouted from downstairs, her voice slicing through the old house like fingernails scraping a chalkboard. "Got it, Mom!" I hollered back, sliding a dusty box closer to the door. I scanned the room that used to be mine, though it hadn't felt like it in years. The bed frame was the same one I'd had since high school, but the mattress was stripped bare and covered in odds and ends my parents hadn't bothered stashing in the attic. The walls were still that faded blue I'd picked out when I was 15, but every poster and reminder of my teenage years was gone. Now, it served as a storage area for their overflow. Old vacuum attachments, Christmas ornaments, and even some of Amanda's trophies. She had always been the golden child, while I was the one left to clean up after everyone. I let out a sigh and shoved another box toward the door before focusing on the closet. It was a mess: clothes, boxes, and random trinkets piled everywhere. It looked like no one had touched it in years. I crouched and began sifting through the clutter. Halfway through pushing aside shoeboxes, I noticed something unusual at the back. Near the floor, the baseboard didn't align perfectly with the wall. A narrow gap was barely visible, but enough to catch my eye. Frowning, I ran my fingers along the edge and felt something. Paper, maybe? Curious, I tugged it free. It wasn't just any paper. It was an envelope, yellowed and creased, with my name, Rebecca, written in elegant cursive. I froze. That handwriting was unmistakable. Grandma Louise. I murmured her name under my breath. She had passed away almost 6 years earlier. She wasn't the kind of grandmother who baked cookies or told bedtime stories, but she had always been kind to me. She had a knack for seeing through people, especially my parents. My heart pounded as I stared at the envelope. Why had she written me a letter? And why was it hidden in the back of a closet, like someone didn't want me to find it? My legs felt unsteady as I sat down on the floor and carefully tore it open. Inside was a folded sheet of thin, yellowed stationery. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The date at the top jumped out at me, March 12th, 2009, just 2 weeks before she died. Dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this, then your parents have failed to follow my instructions. My stomach sank like a rock. Failed to follow her instructions? What did she mean? I set aside a college fund for you, $40,000 in total. This money was intended to help you create the future you deserve, to help you thrive in a family where I've seen your light dimmed far too often. I've noticed how your parents favor Amanda. They have their reasons, but it isn't fair to you. This money is yours. I hope it allows you to chase your dreams. Love always, Grandma Louise. I read those lines at least 5 more times, my heart pounding in my ears. A college fund, $40,000. My parents had always claimed we couldn't afford college, that money was tight. I'd believed them. I didn't question it when they said Amanda needed to attend an out-of-state university because she had potential. I didn't argue when they told me the family needed me to work instead. I'd been pulling double shifts at the diner since I turned 20, while Amanda pursued her dreams. Now, this letter made everything fall apart. They hadn't just lied, they had stolen from me. Rebecca, what's taking so long? My mom's voice jolted me out of my spiraling thoughts. I shoved the letter into my jeans pocket, my pulse racing. "Just found some old papers," I called back, forcing my voice to stay steady. I needed time to process what I'd just uncovered. But time was something I didn't have. I couldn't handle Patricia hovering over me, so I grabbed another box and shoved it toward the door, my thoughts racing. $40,000. My grandmother had left me a shot at something better, and my parents had taken it away. I reflected on all the double shifts I'd endured, dragging myself home at midnight reeking of fryer oil and scorched coffee. I thought about Amanda waltzing in from college, her arms full of glossy shopping bags and her head full of stories about her incredible classes. Meanwhile, I had put my aspirations on hold, telling myself it was for the family. But it wasn't. They didn't need me to give up anything. They just kept choosing Amanda over me, over and over, because to them, she mattered more. I clenched my fists, my eyes burning, but I forced myself to push those feelings aside. Not now. Not with my mom lingering. I heaved the final box toward the door, making myself breathe evenly. When I hauled everything downstairs, Patricia met me with one of her forced, brittle smiles. "All done?" she asked, like I'd just finished reorganizing a closet instead of unearthing a betrayal they'd buried for years. "Just about," I replied, keeping my tone level. Tom was slouched at the kitchen table as usual, glued to his phone. Amanda, predictably, wasn't even there, probably out with her friends, enjoying the life they'd handed her on a silver platter. "Thanks for helping," Patricia added lightly, already turning her attention to setting the dinner table. "Sure thing, Mom," I said, managing a weak smile before slipping into the bathroom. Locking the door, I pulled out the letter, my hands trembling. They had stolen from me. I had no idea what my next step was, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let this go. Dinner that evening felt like some kind of cruel performance. The kitchen looked exactly as it always had. Placemats perfectly arranged, the scent of overcooked green beans heavy in the air, and my mom fussing over the setup like we were about to host a holiday feast. Pretend everything's perfect. That was her specialty. I sat at the table, my stomach churning. Tom was still fixated on his phone, scrolling aimlessly, and Patricia hummed softly as if nothing was wrong. Amanda still hadn't returned, likely out enjoying her carefree life on the money that should have been mine. The letter in my back pocket felt like it was burning a hole straight through me. I couldn't let it go. The entire afternoon replayed in my mind. The long nights at the diner, the times I handed over my last $20 to help pay a bill, the endless praise Amanda received for even the smallest accomplishments while my hard work was simply expected. And now this, the stolen college fund. I couldn't keep quiet about it any longer. Patricia finally finished setting the table and clapped her hands, calling Dad over in her usual cheerful way. He sat down with a grunt, still focused on his phone. I stared at my plate, barely able to look at them, but I had to speak up. If I didn't, I was going to explode. We started eating, the silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Finally, I set my fork down. My hands trembled, but I kept my voice steady. "I found something interesting while I was cleaning today." Patricia froze, her fork midway to her mouth. Dad's phone screen dimmed as he glanced up, eyebrows raised. "Oh?" my mom said lightly, her voice syrupy sweet, but her shoulders were suddenly stiff. I swallowed hard. "A letter from Grandma Louise." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. I noticed my mom's grip tighten on her fork, and my dad quietly set his phone face down. "A letter?" Patricia echoed, her voice just a shade too casual. "Your grandma always loved to write." "It was about a college fund," I said, my eyes locked on her. $40,000. Patricia's knife slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate in the tense silence. Dad cleared his throat and stared down at his food like it was suddenly fascinating. $40,000, I repeated, louder this time because no one was answering. She said it was set aside for me, for my education. Patricia didn't smile this time. Her face went pale, and she pressed a napkin to her lips as if buying time. Finally, Dad spoke, but his voice sounded weak. Rebecca, college is expensive. You have to understand, we used the money where it was needed most. I stared at him, astonished, where it made the most sense. You mean Amanda's tuition? Patricia finally spoke, her voice now sharp. Amanda has potential, Rebecca. She earned her place at that university, and we did what was necessary for the family. For the family? I repeated bitterly. No, you mean for Amanda. What about me? What about my future? You had other options, Patricia retorted, her tone now defensive. We've all made sacrifices, Rebecca. Amanda worked hard for her success, and we had to prioritize. Prioritize? I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. My heart was pounding now, and I couldn't hold back the words. You made me work double shifts at the diner for years. You said there was no money. I gave you half my paycheck, thinking I was helping the family survive, and all along you had my college fund. You stole from me. Don't be dramatic, Patricia snapped, her voice trembling now. We did what we had to do for Amanda's education. She's going to amount to something. And I wasn't? I cut in, my voice cracking, but I didn't care. I wasn't good enough for you. Is that what you're saying? Before Patricia could respond, Amanda walked in, always dressed to perfection with her designer bag over her shoulder and her hair flawless. She froze momentarily when she saw the scene before her, then smirked, as though entering a soap opera. What's going on? She asked, sitting down and pulling out her phone. Your sister is being ridiculous, Patricia said sharply, looking at Amanda like she was an ally. I'm being ridiculous. I turned to Amanda, my face flushed with anger. Grandma left me a college fund, and Mom and Dad drained it to send you to your dream school. Did you know about it? Amanda looked up, raising an eyebrow, then shrugged. A college fund for you? That's news to me. I didn't believe her for a second. How could you not know? $40,000 doesn't just disappear without someone noticing. Relax, she said, rolling her eyes. Even if it's true, what does it matter now? You wouldn't have done anything with the money anyway. It's not like you were going to be a doctor or something. That was it. That was the final straw. Are you kidding me? My voice shook, but I didn't care. I didn't get a chance to do anything because they stole that chance from me and gave it to you. Amanda looked momentarily shocked, but quickly recovered, shaking her head. Whatever, Rebecca. You're overreacting. My mom finally spoke again, her voice cold. We made decisions that were best for the family, Rebecca. Life isn't fair. You should know that by now. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping loudly across the floor. No, I said, my voice low and shaking with fury. What you did wasn't for the family. It was for Amanda. You chose her. You always have. Patricia didn't look at me. Dad just stared at his plate, silent and useless as ever. Amanda had already gone back to scrolling through her phone, uninterested, as if the entire conversation wasn't worth her attention. I pulled the letter from my pocket, slammed it on the table, and looked at all of them. Grandma wanted me to have a future, and you took it from me. I hope it was worth it. No one spoke as I turned and walked out of the room. My mom called after me, Rebecca, don't make this a big deal. I didn't look back. I didn't trust myself to. I stormed up to my room, slammed the door behind me, and paced back and forth. My chest was heaving, my mind racing, my hands shaking, and I felt like I was going to explode. For years, I believed them. I trusted every lie they told me about why I couldn't go to college, why I had to sacrifice my life to help them, and all along, they'd stolen from me. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my head in my hands. This wasn't just favoritism or unfairness. It was betrayal, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do now. Aunt Deborah's house was about 20 minutes outside Cedarville, nestled on a peaceful street lined with overgrown trees. Her home was just as I remembered it, small and cozy, with a pale green porch and wind chimes that tinkled softly in the morning breeze. I gently knocked and opened the door, and there she was, Aunt Deborah. Her hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore a sweater 2 sizes too large, as though she had just gotten out of bed. She looked me over with her sharp, perceptive eyes, before giving me a warm smile. "Becca, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Come on in." As soon as I entered, I felt a sense of relief. Her house smelled of vanilla and old books, with the soft sound of classical music playing in the background. She guided me to the kitchen table, where a plate of freshly baked muffins awaited. "Sit down," she said, as she poured me a cup of tea. "Start talking. You look like you need it." I sat and pulled out Grandma Louise's letter from my bag, sliding it across the table. "I found this yesterday while cleaning out my room. It's from Grandma Louise. She left me a college fund, $40,000. Deborah's expression shifted immediately. The warmth in her eyes faded, replaced by something colder and more serious. She picked up the letter, read through it, then let out a long sigh before setting it down. "So, you finally found it." I blinked. "What do you mean, finally?" Deborah leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Your grandma told me about this years ago. She was worried, Rebecca. She knew your parents had a habit of redirecting things, especially for Amanda." My stomach sank. "You knew?" "Yes," she answered softly. "But I didn't understand what your parents had done until after she passed." I stared at her, my hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because Louise asked me not to," she replied. "She made me promise not to interfere unless you found out on your own. She wanted you to be ready. She said you would need the strength to stand up to them." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "So, you just let them take it?" Deborah winced but stood her ground. "I didn't let them do anything. I trusted Louise's judgment. And you know what? She was right. Look at you. You found the letter, and now you're here. You're ready." I didn't feel ready. I felt angry, betrayed, and overwhelmed. I looked at Deborah, my voice quivering. "Is there proof? Anything I can use?" Deborah's face softened, and she stood up. "Wait here." She disappeared into the back of the house and returned a minute later with a thick manila envelope. She placed it in front of me with a heavy thud. "Your grandma didn't leave anything to chance," Deborah said. "These are copies of the bank records, the letters she sent to the trustees, even a recording of a conversation she had with your parents." I froze, staring at the envelope. "A recording?" Deborah nodded. "She knew what kind of people they were, Rebecca. She wanted to ensure there was proof if something like this ever happened." My heart raced as I opened the envelope and began pulling out the documents. The first thing I saw were a series of bank statements, regular deposits into the account for years. The balance steadily grew until it hit $440,000. Then, 3 months after Grandma Louise passed, the entire account was drained. Amanda's tuition. Every last penny. My hands trembled as I flipped through the records. The truth was undeniable. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. They had stolen from me. They had lied to me. And they didn't even feel guilty about it. I looked up at Deborah. My vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. They stole it all. Deborah reached across the table, placing her hand over mine. I'm so sorry, Becca. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to stop it. But Louise believed in you. She believed you'd find this when you were ready to fight for yourself. Before I could respond, there was a loud thud outside. Deborah's face hardened, and she turned toward the window. I followed her gaze, my stomach sinking. A car had just pulled into the driveway. My mom's SUV. They followed me, I whispered. Deborah stood up, her face set in determination. Let me handle this. The front door burst open before she could even reach it. Patricia stormed in first, her face red and furious, followed by my dad, looking as uncomfortable and guilty as ever. We need to talk, Patricia snapped, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. I rose slowly, straightening my posture, and my mom's gaze quickly shifted to the papers scattered on the table. I could see her face lose color. You mean these? I asked coldly, motioning to the bank statements and letters. Patricia opened her mouth to reply, but Aunt Deborah positioned herself between us. You don't get to come into my home and start making demands, Patricia, she stated firmly. This is family business. My mom hissed. It doesn't concern you. Deborah raised an eyebrow. It concerns Rebecca. And right now, that's all that matters. Patricia's glare returned to me. Rebecca, you had no right to dig this up. You don't understand everything we've done for you. You mean everything you've done for Amanda? I retorted, my voice trembling with anger, though I didn't care. You stole my future. You lied to me for years, and you think I'm just going to let it go? My mom's face turned even redder, but before she could reply, I snatched the envelope from the table and shoved it into my bag. We're done here, I said, my voice low. You need to leave. The room fell silent. My dad glanced at me, then at the floor, while Patricia clenched her jaw as if wanting to argue. But Aunt Deborah didn't move, and neither did I. Finally, my mom spun around and stormed out, with my dad following her. As soon as they were gone, I let out a shaky breath and collapsed into the chair. Deborah sat across from me, her expression soft. You did well, kid, she said. That wasn't easy. No, I whispered, but it's not over yet. I hadn't expected them to give up quietly after the confrontation at Aunt Deborah's. If anything, I should have known my parents would only get more aggressive. They'd spent their whole lives controlling and manipulating me, convincing me I owed them everything. The following morning, my phone was flooded with texts from Patricia. At first, it was guilt-tripping nonsense. Rebecca, I can't believe you embarrassed us like that. We're your parents. We did what was best for you. You don't understand how hard we worked to keep this family together. When I didn't reply, the tone shifted to anger. You're acting like a spoiled brat. Grow up. You think you're so much better than us. You'll regret this, Rebecca. Then came the most ridiculous message of all. We've calculated the cost of raising you since you turned 18. You owe us $12,000 for rent, food, and utilities. I stared at that last message, a bitter laugh escaping me. They had stolen $40,000 from me, money meant for my future, and now they wanted me to pay them back for the privilege of being their daughter. I blocked her number. The first step toward breaking free was finding my own place. Living under their roof was no longer an option. Every time I passed Patricia in the kitchen or saw Tom lounging on the couch pretending nothing had happened, that burning anger flared up inside me. I couldn't look at them without seeing what they had done to me. Thankfully, I had been secretly saving money in a separate account for years. It wasn't much. I'd never earned more than minimum wage at the diner, but it was enough to cover the deposit for a studio apartment on the outskirts of Cedarville. The place was tiny, just one room with creaky floors, a barely functioning kitchen, and a bathroom so cramped you could brush your teeth while sitting on the toilet. But when I stood there holding the keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. I spent the next few days quietly moving my things out of my parents' house, piece by piece. Clothes, a few books, the old laptop I'd saved up for when I was 19. I didn't say a word about my plans, and honestly, I don't think they even noticed. Patricia had been sulking ever since the confrontation at Deborah's, and Tom was still glued to his phone, acting like the whole thing hadn't happened. On the fourth day, I was almost ready to leave for good when Amanda showed up at the diner. I was behind the counter, wiping down tables, when I heard the familiar jingle of the bell over the door. I looked up and froze. Amanda stood in the middle of the diner, completely out of place in her tailored coat, holding her expensive designer purse. She looked like she had just stepped out of a catalog, her hair perfectly styled, her expression smug. "We need to talk," she said, sliding onto a bar stool like she owned the place. "I'm working," I replied flatly, turning back to the counter. "That's fine," Amanda responded without a care. "I'll wait." I sighed, dropped the rag I had been holding, and leaned on the counter. "What do you want?" I asked. Her expression softened, as if trying to appear sympathetic, but it was all fake, and we both knew it. "Mom's been a mess since you had that outburst. Do you have any idea how much stress you've caused her? She had a panic attack last night." I blinked at her. "Not my problem." Amanda's false concern disappeared instantly. "Not your problem?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "Rebecca, they're struggling because of you. They had to take out a second mortgage to pay for my tuition, and now they're behind on their payments. They were counting on your rent money to help with that." I stared at her, my hands tightening into fists. "You mean the money I've been giving them for years that they never told me was going toward your tuition?" Amanda scoffed, clearly offended. "It wasn't just for me. It was for the whole family." I let out a hollow laugh. "The whole family, right? The same family that told me we couldn't afford college while they handed everything to you. You're so selfish, Rebecca." Amanda snapped, her voice full of frustration. "All they ever wanted was for us to succeed, and now you're ruining everything because you can't let go of some stupid college fund." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "They ruined everything when they decided I didn't matter. You think I'm selfish? Look in the mirror, Amanda. You took everything from me, and you don't even care." Amanda opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her speak. I turned my back on her and walked straight to the break room. I pulled out my phone and sent a simple message to my mom. "I'm moving out." Moving day arrived sooner than I expected. I packed the last of my things into my old beat-up car, not bothering to say goodbye. Patricia was in the kitchen, pretending not to notice, while Tom sat in the living room staring at the TV. Neither of them said a word as I walked past with my bags. For a brief moment, I paused in the doorway, looking back at the house I had grown up in. It felt strange to leave without any fanfare, without a single word of acknowledgement, but it also felt right. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove off. The studio apartment wasn't anything special. The floors creaked, and the windows rattled when the wind blew, but it was mine. I dragged my mattress up the narrow stairs, set up a small table I had bought at a thrift store, and threw my clothes into a plastic storage bin I was using as a makeshift dresser. That first night, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, eating cold pizza straight from the box, staring at my new reality. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of my parents' expectations. Of course, they didn't stop trying. Patricia's texts started flooding in the next day. "You're breaking this family apart. Are you happy now? You'll never make it on your own." You think you can survive without us? I ignored every message. Over the next week, I focused on getting my life back on track. I looked into night classes at the local community college, trying to figure out a way to start over. I made a tight budget, cutting corners wherever I could so I'd have enough to enroll. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. For the first time, my future felt like it was in my own hands. But of course, they weren't finished with me yet. One evening, as I was settling onto my second-hand couch with a stack of apartment listings for fun, there was a loud, insistent knock at the door. When I opened it, my heart sank. There they were, my mom, my dad, and Amanda, standing in the narrow hallway like they had come to stage some sort of intervention. Patricia looked furious, her eyes wild, while Tom just seemed exhausted. Amanda, of course, had that smug look on her face like she thought she was winning. "This ends now," Patricia said, shoving a folder of papers into my hands. "What is this?" I asked, already feeling my anger rise. "It's a bill," she snapped. "Everything we've spent on you since you turned 18, room, board, utilities. You owe us $122,000. I stared at her, my hand shaking as I gripped the folder. "You've got to be kidding me." Tom spoke up then, his voice weak. "We invested in you, Rebecca. And this is how you repay us?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. "You stole $40,000 from me, and now you want me to pay for the privilege of being your free labor? Unbelievable." Amanda rolled her eyes. "They did what they had to do. You wouldn't understand." I stepped forward, my voice trembling with rage. "No, Amanda. I don't understand how you can stand here and act like you're the victim when I gave up everything for you." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "Get out of my apartment. I'm done." The three of them stood there, stunned, before Patricia finally turned and stormed off, Amanda trailing behind her. Tom lingered for a moment, like he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. "Out," I said again, my voice firm. He sighed and followed them down the hallway, leaving me standing alone in the doorway. For the first time, I felt free. I shut the door behind them and locked it, then leaned back against the wood, letting out a shaky breath. My heart pounded and my hands shook from the confrontation, but there was a strange sense of calm beginning to settle in. They were finally gone, along with their demands, their manipulations, and their guilt trips. All of that stayed on the other side of the door. For the first time, I had drawn a line, and I wasn't going to cross it. I sank onto the couch, staring at the folder my mom had shoved into my hands. The absurdity of it hit me all over again. They truly believed I owed them money for raising me. I opened the folder and glanced at the jotted list inside. $1,300 a month for rent, $150 for food, $75 for utilities. They had broken everything down as if I were some kind of tenant, mooching off them. The audacity of it! I threw the folder onto the coffee table, where it landed with a sharp slap. My breathing began to slow, but the anger still burned. How had I let it go this far? How had I spent so much of my life thinking this was normal, believing that their lives were just sacrifices for the family? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my too-small bed, the faint glow of the streetlight seeping through the curtains. I thought about everything. Every double shift, every paycheck handed over, every time they told me there wasn't enough for me. My mind wandered to Amanda. She had been so smug at the door, as always, so certain she'd won. Maybe she really believed I didn't matter, that I was the one who had failed, not her. Maybe they all believed that, but I didn't anymore. Not now. The next morning, I woke up with a fire inside me that I hadn't felt in years. I was done being an afterthought. I wasn't going to let them define me any longer. I grabbed my phone and began searching. For years, I had pushed college to the back of my mind, telling myself it wasn't possible, that I had missed my chance. But now? Now, no one was going to stop me. I found a program at the local community college that fit my schedule. Business classes at night, part-time, so I could still work at the diner. "Welcome to the beginning of your next chapter," she said. Her words stuck with me as I sat at my shaky kitchen table that evening, filling out paperwork under the dim light of a cheap lamp I had bought at a thrift store. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. The future wasn't something my parents or Amanda could decide for me anymore. Of course, they didn't stop trying to sink their claws back into me. A week later, as I finished my shift at the diner, I saw Patricia sitting in the corner booth. Her hair was frizzy, her face tired, but she still had that air of superiority. She'd been waiting for me. I groaned quietly under my breath and wiped my hands on my apron before walking over. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She looked up at me, her lips tight. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do," I replied, crossing my arms. "Rebecca, don't be like this," she said, softening her voice, trying to guilt me. "You're tearing this family apart." I didn't flinch. "No, Mom. I'm just refusing to let you tear me apart anymore." Her face hardened, and for a moment, I saw her mask slip. "You think you're better than us now? You think you can make it on your own? Let me tell you something. You don't know how hard life is. You'll come crawling back." "No, I won't," I said calmly, meeting her gaze. "You made sure I knew how hard life is when you took everything from me. I'm not coming back, Mom. Ever." Her mouth opened as though she wanted to argue, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I turned and walked back to the counter, leaving her sitting there alone. That night, I sat in my small apartment with my college forms spread out in front of me. My phone buzzed on the table. Another text from Amanda. "You're being ridiculous, Rebecca. Mom's falling apart. You need to apologize." I stared at the message, shaking my head. It was just like Amanda to think I was the one at fault. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and shoved it into a drawer. They could scream, they could guilt trip, they could blame me for the rest of their lives. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward.